is dialogue time. And today it's my joy to introduce Abbey Quinn of SumerianAstrology.com and Sumerian Astrology, the YouTube channel. Abbey, would you please introduce yourself? So tell us a little about your work, yourself, anything you like, anything in your own words.
Yeah, absolutely. I don't know how much detail into the intro you want me to go into, but I clearly do Sumerian astrology. It is the oldest form of astrology on Earth. We can actually talk about this a little bit. There is some controversy as to whether the Sumerians actually did astrology. They 100% did. It's quite obvious. We can debunk that point very easily, but when you start to get into like the scholarly side of it, they do their very best in the academic world to kind of strip as much away as they can, kind of sanitize it. But I also worked for, let me see here, 26 years now, doing astrology, psychic medium work. I've done everything from paranormal investigations, multiple continents. I've done exorcism. I like all kinds of, think of all the weird stuff, you know, I've dabbled in it for sure. I prefer to do, astrology is absolutely my passion. I tried for many, many years to make that the focus of what I was doing. I kind of did the psychic medium work because I had to, because there's a giant market for it, obviously. I mean, that's how, you know, I was full-time. That's how I was paying my bills. But it wasn't, I want to say there was like about 10 years ago, I really started to push, not Sumerian astrology, just let's, you know, baby step into it. Sidereal astrology into like the mainstream. And at the time there were a handful of people, obviously, you know, oh goodness, you guys late here, you're gonna have to forgive me.
Go ahead, take your time. There's so many names. Cyril Fagan, the godfather, right? Yes,
he pushed this back in like 60s, 70s.
70s,
he made
60s,
he made some headway. Obviously in Vedic astrology or Jyotish, everybody's using the sidereal zodiac, but in the Western side, you know, it was really hard to make that happen. I worked hard writing articles, trying to, you know, having as many conversations with people as I possibly could about, hey, why don't we look at the actual sky and see what's going on here? Slowly but surely, you know, 10 years later, and I sure am not trying to take credit for it. I know there's been other people out there too who've been trying this, you know, for the last 10, 20, 30 years. I don't know how long. To do the same thing, but it's gotten much easier. And in that process, it's
easier to what? Present sidereal with like some credibility, or like,
well, now it's not too much of an issue. Maybe 30% of the people, maybe 30% of the people don't know what it is still when they come to me, if they find me. But that's kind of the first bridge to get people. Now let's go back. Now that you've wrapped your head around the fact that I'm not looking at a tropical chart, we're actually looking at the sky. Now let's look at the ancient world, because that's what we're basically doing, and that's a whole different ballgame.
It is. It is. That's interesting.
Yeah, there's
you got into it doing sidereal astrology, just kind of like 12 sign, even sign sidereal astrology.
No, I started out tropical, like pretty much everybody else. It didn't last long. My tropical stint, because I was working professionally at the time, and I was getting maybe like 50% of the people are like, that doesn't resonate. You know, I don't know what you do. I'm like, I don't know. All of my my teachers are telling me this is what it should be.
What is telling me says so. Right.
So I switched to the sidereal. I did tiptoe into Jyotish a little bit, namely because that's my teachers, you know, that's what they were doing. Sure. And I did find some.
So your teachers, what were they teaching you that they were also
they were either straight tropical or straight Vedic. There was nothing, you know, classical or Vedic. But
and then just to interject a little context, Cyril Fagan, what Cyril Fagan was doing was, he liked the Vedic thing, but he was doing Western astrology, and he said, well, let's make a Western zodiac that isn't tropical, but it's aligned. And the Fagan Bradley is like an Ayanamsa, or it's considered like a sidereal orientation for even sign. So a lot of people use that, but you were going kind of deeper into the history of it, or the accuracy of it. What was it for you? What was the pull? What was the draw to get?
Well, after I tried some of the Vedic interpretations, the associations. I tried the Western sidereal stuff too, like do the classical, and I was still, it just wasn't good enough. And I'm a perfectionist, and I was like, something's wrong here. Let's go back to the beginning and figure out what the problem is.
Let's go back to the beginning and figure out what happened. Yeah, how did we get here? How the fuck did we get here? Right.
That process was not easy.
Yeah.
The amount of there were nights I didn't sleep because I was digging out information. It was rough.
I can tell. It's like a passion project for you. It's not just like a hobby, or like there's something powerful and important for you. I can relate in my own way.
It's wrapped up in my my spiritual life, my beliefs, I would say, like, even my religious practices, if we could even call it that.
We don't have to get into that in this conversation, but I will say, just in response to that I feel similarly, that my astrological counsel to people is my dharma. It's my seva. It's whatever you want to call it in any sort of like spiritual framework context. I have a little bit of a Vedic education, so I can use those words in sentences, but that's all I want to do for now. I just want to leave that there. But astrology in Tibet is a branch of medicine. It's a branch of astrology is a branch of medicine in Tibet. It's taken some different terms. They use it really heavily in the diagnostic sense. But the point is, it can be well, I guess the point is it can be a lot of things in different contexts. And I think just to get back, because that was a tangent about sort of Vedic stuff. Cyril Fagan sort of cued the Western world, because Vedic practices with these weird squares or triangles, and a lot of people, it's a different chart format. It's not rocket science, but people from the West don't quite understand. The West uses the circle with the zodiac around. It's a literal star map, or it was before tropical, and then it uses aspects. So in the West, we use aspects that in Vedic they don't quite use, and that set you looking back, because it just whatever the even sign alignment or just the science as it wasn't good enough. So you went looking back.
Yes.
And before we get to Sumer, because Sumer is back like 3 steps, you have the Chaldeans at the end of the Babylonian era that made really significant contributions to astrology as we practice it today. And then you have the Babylonians, who also did astrology, straight up astrology, horoscope, natal astrology, mundane astrology. And from there, gosh, you have this sort of proto-Babylonian, like the Akkadian and the Sumerian, and they didn't overlap, but you have all these cultures. Historically, you could take a timeline back and say Sumer predated Babylon. Like we can make that statement.
Yes, by many thousands of years.
That's right. Yeah. So how do we get from like today in the 70s, Cyril Fagan just starting to take the lid off that? And how do we get back to you practicing the most probably ancient form that we have any real record of? Can you take us on that walk, just like briefly, or however you want?
It's been so long since I went.
Love your nails, by the way.
Oh, thanks. It's Halloween themed over here.
Okay, great.
Yes. Old Gaelic New Year. I used to practice Gaelic traditionalism, and this was our big one. So.
Wow, cool. Yeah, Samhain. Yes.
Yes.
Cool.
So basically, what happened, and I'm grossly generalizing here. Yeah. Cyril Fagan, along with a handful of other people that he was working with, they went back through the Babylonian documents, and they were able to essentially rectify the oldest zodiac. And in doing that, they were able to, pinpoint these different stars. That kind of the Fagan-Bradley Ayanamsa, I believe, is only 1 degree different from Lahiri, which is one of the, it's not, it's basically the same.
It is. It's just a slight dialing in to bring some borders closer to their sidereal whatever. Yeah.
Now, when you go all the way back, first of all, and we kind of touched on this before we before we got started,
right.
When we talk about Göbekli Tepe and
Right.
possibly whatever ancient culture, I'm of the opinion that
well, let's now, I'm not going to assume that everyone listening to this conversation is familiar with Göbekli Tepe just because we are, but these are sites, they're Tepe sites. I don't know what Tepe means, but there's a couple of, what does it mean?
Like a hill, like a mound.
A hill, thank you, a mound. So there's Göbekli Tepe, which is a site that dates back to almost the end of the Wisconsin Ice Age, almost 9, maybe 10,000 years ago. Is that correct?
It's right after the end of the Younger Dryas, almost
Younger Dryas. Okay.
Yeah, it's bizarre how close it is. Yes.
Okay, and then there's Karahan Tepe and some other tepes. These are significant sites. Now, just to unpack this really briefly, the Tepe sites that we're talking about, they have carvings that indicate astrological symbolism to some people, and they have carvings that could indicate calendrical science, and then that's harder to deny or gloss. And they have alignments to solstitial and seasonal points, so it seems to function not only as a temple but as a henge, a calendrical henge to some people. And we don't know, because the Turkish government shut it down, because it puts a stick in the eye of the entire institutional historical timeline. And what the tepes indicate that relates to Sumerian astrology, I'm going to turn that over to you. Can you say anything about why you bring the tepes into this?
Yes, because in my estimation, again, I can't prove it, I wasn't there, it seems to me that the Sumerians and their knowledge is exceptionally detailed. This is not an emerging society.
Wasn't a prototype,
Yeah, this is what they had, I can't say their writing, their mythology, their deities, astrology, any of the type, they were big into divination of all different kinds.
Yes.
I would assume, and a lot of people admit this, it's not just, people on the fringe, that they're probably adopting this from cultures, either one, like a super culture, or, a bunch of pulling from different regions.
Sure.
And they just happen to do the best job of documenting it. And those documents happen to survive. And we're just very fortunate. Now, will someone, I get a little frustrated when people say the Sumerians invented the wheel, they invented writing, they invented agriculture. There's no way. There's no way they invented all of these things out of nowhere. Not just that, but when you listen to their ancient king lists and their the time frames that they're using, they even make it sound like, no, their society went back, just like the Egyptians, tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands. I don't think it goes back hundreds of thousands, but it definitely goes back prior to the end of the last ice age.
Yeah. So we've talked about the end of the last ice age. You talked about the younger Dryas. That was a climate change event. In the 150,000 years that modern humans, like Homo sapiens as we sort of think about it today, have existed, there have been so many disasters of an order, society disrupting disasters. I mean, we have a geological record that is something no one wants to talk about, honestly. And Velikovsky got in a lot of trouble for it, and
Yeah, anybody who brings it up, that's the end of your career.
Yeah, you can't talk about the bad things. People don't want to hear about the very bad things, and that's unfortunate, because they're part of our human journey. They're part of our history, and surviving the very bad things is, something that we have every indication that people survive those two events, the Wisconsin Ice Age and and the myth we get handed to us in institutions all over the world is that we emerged from some sort of, I don't know, Bronze Age cave people, or there were caged people in the Bronze Age too. But the cave myth is stupid, that we arose from like a sort of simian stupidity to evolve, to our current, obviously super awesome level of understanding things like how to be human. The whole narrative just gets turned on its head. So I like that you bring that up. And so I like it because it doesn't assume that Sumer is the beginning of everything.
Right.
So, other cultures.
Stand by, my
go
daughter's
ahead.
ringing the doorbell. 1 second.
Awesome. Yeah, we got to take a quick break while Abby answers the door for her daughter. So she'll be back in 3, 2, 1. All right, and we're back. Cool, no worries.
Sorry about that.
No. Family first. It's important. So we were talking about timelines and evolution, and people, and how people don't seem likely to have emerged from the kind of I don't know, simple hunter-gathering stupidity. But there's all kinds of holes in that narrative. The Teepes being some of them. I'm going to release a video soon. I'm scripted it and I haven't shot it yet, but it involves a little section on the Antikythera mechanism, which is dated to about 200 BC. And was an orrery with the visible planets, and it charted Saros cycles. And like, we know that this is like an analog computer, like a bunch of gears that they could hand crank, and it would show where the planets were. They could predict eclipses. That's just an example of a hole in that narrative, that that at 200 BC, what they show you in school is like clay tablets. 200 BC, they show you, here's what people were doing with pokey sticks in the mud.
Yeah.
So how does Sumer what relevance does that have to Sumer, aside from the obvious that it's not an invention? It's probably, we have every right to believe it could be inherited knowledge from oral tradition, prior cultures that we've lost the history, perhaps the writing systems of. Does it have other importance to you, or did I get the main point? To summarize the main point.
You mean the timeline?
Yeah. The idea that the timeline might be totally different. Is there something around Sumer that's like, is there more there, or is that the point that you wanted to make, that Sumer might not be where it all began?
Like I said, I just don't think that that's likely, that that's the beginning of everything. It doesn't. They didn't seem unsure. They didn't seem like, when they wrote about it, they didn't seem like, oh, we just discovered this. They wrote, that's right,
this is how it is.
Yes, it was. It just came on the scene, and they just happened to be writing about it at the time. Writing itself is an interesting thing, because up until kind of recently in human history, writing belonged to the priestly class. So you were either very wealthy, or you dedicated your life to just writing and scribing. That was your thing.
And would you say that's a European statement, or a general worldwide statement?
I think it was probably the case around the world.
Okay, thank you.
Just because
I would agree. I'm just curious your take on that.
Even if we look at how the Sumerians documented everything with a stylus and a reed stylus and clay tablets, We don't find those other places, they're the only ones. So I think if it was more, and again, I'm not saying they didn't have it, they just didn't have it to the same degree. So one of the things that happened, the Sumerians were able to, namely because the climate back then was likely much different than it, we currently think of Iraq and those areas of the world.
Right.
They had a lot of marshland, they had a lot of mud. And they were able, with the technology, whether again they inherited it, or if they had invented it, like you said, why aren't they talking about how they're inventing it, who invented it? They don't do that. They just talk about it as if it's already there, or they create a mythical story around it. But even those stories kind of predate their own history.
Right. That's their antiquity and their
yes.
Right. Yeah.
Yes. So even they thought of it like it was some very, very old invention. But they built up their culture enough and built up their resources enough to where they had what we would consider now wealth. And not necessarily monetary wealth, but they had resources. They
leisure time and resources. Yeah. And that's interesting, because right about that time, historically, all over the world, people started to store grain. They just started to do it. That's what we think. I see skepticism in your eyeballs.
I'm agreeing. I agree with you. As a matter of fact, I think, and I can only speculate, if the problem after the end of the last ice age was, if there was a global cataclysm, which it looks like there was, we're just dealing with a population problem. It's going to take a few thousand years for the population to restabilize. Once it does, that's when the Sumerian culture really comes on the scene. And that's where we start to see all over the world, all these things are happening in tandem. Now, not to go off onto like a tangent, but there is the morphic resonance theory. Dr. Rupert Sheldrake. So maybe, if one human figures it out over here, the other cultures simultaneously start, it pops up over there too. I don't think that that's necessary. It could be both of the same. I don't know.
I'm sure that sounds valid.
Yeah, but along the same lines, during that period where we now start to have wealth, we now have in Sumer in particular, we start to see the development of city-states, temples at the center of these, cultural centers, places of worship. But what they fixated on primarily was the sky. They tracked, not always in, one of the things that the Babylonians did, they were meticulous. I mean, they went into a ton of detail. The Sumerians were a little bit more obscure with some of their metrics, not so much in, at least as far as what we consider to be astrology, like predictive astrology. It was a little bit more veiled, and that's part of the reason why there's still some debate in the academic world.
Thank you. Like veiled in mythology more than the Babylonians were more like hard kind of correlations, story and allegory.
Yes.
Okay. Thank
absolutely.
you. Yeah.
But they also were okay. So maybe we do have to work backwards just a little bit. And the reason why is because the Babylonians, they, are credited by many still to this day with inventing astrology. And the reason for that is because they kept such detailed records. They were very meticulous, and, they have these detailed menologies and astrolabes and the Sumerians.
And in there's a couple layers of that to me when you say the Babylonians invented astrology. Like we have older records of astrology. Obviously they didn't, but it was in Babylon that the 18 or various star groups were codified into the even 12 sign zodiac. That was in Babylon that happened. So that's my understanding.
That is correct.
So in a way, it was the birthplace of like modern astrology. But so that's like one layer of it. Another layer of it is just flagrant falsehood, and people who don't understand history, who just want to say like, oh, they did this, they were old, they must be invented it.
Well, here's the thing that a lot of again scholars don't like people to think about or mention. So it wasn't just astrology that the Babylonians were codifying. They did every form of divination. As a matter of fact, okay, so going back to Sumer, the Sumerian language continued as a living language for 2,000 years.
Okay.
Even after the Sumerian culture died out, people were still speaking Sumerian.
Yeah,
Then
I've
the
noticed
Akkadians,
some of that.
yes. So
that's
then
all I'll say.
yes, the Akkadians, fortunately, you know, they left us a ton of records. The Babylonians took those same records, and even into the late Babylonian period, and even technically into the Common Era, there were still documents being written in Sumerian. And so that in itself is very significant, because this would be like, so when the British went into India and were occupying it, it would be like if the British went and rewrote all of their holy documents, all of their their academic works, their administrative works, into Sanskrit. It makes absolutely no sense. And this is what the Akkadians did, the Babylonians did. Why are you holding on to this language in rewriting your entire culture in this language?
So how much, this might seem like a weird question, but stay with me.
Okay.
The Sumerian was more mythological and storied in its transmission of information than the Babylonian. That's how much of the Sumerian stories, and how much of the Sumerian mythology, and how much of the Sumerian archetypal understandings, like the Anu and the Enki and the Enlil, how much of that came through in Babylonian culture?
A great deal. A great deal.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay. I'm not sure the next question to ask. That leaves me with a lot of questions, sort of 3 of them taking off all at once from the station. What do you think about that? Why don't you just continue in what you were trying to say?
I suspect that the Sumerians understood that there was encoded information in their language. Yeah. When you actually start to read and translate Sumerian, there are just multiple meanings layered onto every single syllable.
Yeah.
The Akkadians, when they started to use the Sumerian language, they kept this theme of trying to, whether just for posterity, they thought it was cool. I doubt that's what was going on. Or they really believed there's this deeper meaning, to this language. Maybe they knew inherently that this language, actually not in its form that it was, but was an inherited language from the people who came before that, for how long, we don't know how far back that could go.
Sure.
But this is the thing about the astrology and the divination, because they didn't just keep the Babylonians at their late stage Babylon. They didn't just have access to the Sumerian language still. They also had all of the Sumerian divination information, like anything regarding divination that they had, liver divinations, dream interpretation,
and
liver
their entire scry the entrails, right? They do all kind of divinations. They didn't have tarot. Tarot hadn't been invented yet.
Yes, so it was huge. But what's interesting is that the Babylonian divinations, they didn't originate. That was also inherited from the Sumerian period. So we're just supposed to believe that the Babylonians created this astrological system. They know that they didn't. They accept that, yes, it was probably a continuation, but it wasn't canonized until the Babylonian period. So we're just going to give the Babylonians credit for it. But when you actually start to read the names of the Mulapin, don't make any sense in the later languages. They only make sense if you look at them from the Sumerian side.
And the Mulapin, if I may, was a Babylonian star guide, right?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay. Thank you.
And even their zodiac, they have an initial version of the zodiac that doesn't make sense even to the Babylonians. They're not ordered in the way that the zodiac follows. It's very quite bizarre. And
I want to say, anyone who's listening to this right now, check out the Wikipedia page on the Babylonian star catalogs. Do I have that right? Babylonian star catalogs, and you'll see how the before the invention of the even sign zodiac, the Babylonians thought about the zodiacal constellations. But go ahead. That's just an interjection. I want to turn it back.
Yeah, and that went that was like the early Babylonian period too, that they were still using what is, you know, the 17 to 19, depending on how you want to organize the names, different constellations that the Sumerians were using.
Mm-hmm.
Now, one of the other
thank you. That's an important point, because those Babylonian star catalogs do go right back to Sumer, and we know that.
Absolutely, they do. That there's no doubt about that.
From the Sumerian star catalogs, like
yes,
we know now. Okay, thank you.
Yes, what they did was the Babylonians and the even the Akkadians, you know, every successive culture, some of these kings, they were really into history and they were very literate and they wanted to amass all this information. So they would go around and they'd try to find all these old documents and compile them, you know, recopy them into make sure that they had lots of records of them.
Ashurbanipal had a famous library. That was
absolutely yes.
Nineveh. That was later.
Yes.
But thank you. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
So in this process, like there's not a debate whether or not the Sumerians were tracking the movements of the sky. That's one of the, like some of the oldest records we have. Right. That's what they're doing.
We know that's what they did. Absolutely.
The debate comes in whether or not they were doing astrology, like the traditional astrology, like trying to make these predictions. But we know that they were. There are so many references. We could talk for hours on these references. We're not going to do that, but I will mention, if anybody out there is interested, one of the most obvious ones is the Gudea cylinder seal. Seal A in particular, don't ask me for dates, you guys. G-U-D-E-A. G-U-D-E-A.
Got you, thank you.
Yes. Particularly Seal A, if memory serves, don't ask me to date it, you guys. I have dyslexia and it's way worse with numbers. So they just come in and out and flicker in my brain. So it's worthless to try to get me to date something.
Yeah.
But basically what happened was Gudea, this king, and this is what the tablet is reciting. He basically he's told by one of the gods he has to build this temple in order to figure out the proper auspices, you know, when and where should I build this temple. He has to consult a goddess who lives in the temple of the star. She has a star tablet made of lapis lazuli that she consults, and she tells him, you know, she's auguring the proper time and place to do this. Now,
from the sky. The sky was the divination method. Is that what you're
either from her tablet of stars or in her temple of stars, which is likely also an observatory.
Right. And sure. So we have to think about this somewhat poetically.
Yes, and this is in the Sumerian period. So I don't know, poetic. Michael, you're an astrologer. Does that sound like something somebody would do using astrology to look at the sky? Maybe look at your charts here to see what's going on, to try to take the best guess at when the best time and place to build a temple is?
Yeah. That's horary astrology. That's basic.
Yeah,
it's interesting. It reminds me that in Greece, I know you're chomping back a thought, and I respect that. But in Greece, the word for what it wasn't astrology; it was divination by means of astronomy. It was the long Greek word that translate my Greek's non-existent, so I would just translate it to English. Divination by means of astronomy. I love that. It's so important, and that's Greek. So at that point, they were using the even sign zodiac. And at that point, it was still sidereal, although from the time of like 200 BC to about 200 of the modern era, the common era, there was a conversation going on about why the stars moved, because Hipparchus of Rhodes charted Spica, however you prefer to say it, and he realized it had a different position than the ancient recorded. And that started 400 years of chaos that closed. Claudius Ptolemy closed that 400 years by saying, well, the stars aren't trustworthy. They moved. The debate was whether they wobbled like the planets, or whether they just rotated around the Earth, because it was known that the Earth was the center of the universe.
Right.
Now, in Greece, they codified tropical, but before tropical, it was all sidereal. There was nothing. There's nothing but, and that goes back to Babylon. So this
Well, it
is
goes
why
back to Sumer, and it was
back to
basically just we're looking at the sky.
in
know.
Sumer they were looking at the sky, and in Babylon they were looking at the sky. But then they codified in Babylon that sort of 12,
Yes,
because 12 is a sweet number. You got to admit. I
it's a
don't
good
think
number. I like it. I'm a fan.
it's okay. People get down on 12. They're like, oh, 13, but I don't get
That's
excited
medieval
about that.
superstition.
I agree, and there's a lot of that floating around. It's powerful, but so one of the timelines that I think is really helpful just to establish is just this idea that in Sumer they used the sky like they didn't even have like an even sign zodiac. They didn't. Not in Sumer, I don't think they had an even sign zodiac. You can feel free to correct me. Feel free.
No, they did not have an even sign zodiac. They just had the path of the moon is what they considered it, and it follows obviously the current 12 sign zodiac.
Yeah.
But obviously the moon does not. It's not relegated specifically to the
This is
traditional
diagonal band. Yeah.
Yeah.
It does wobble. Yeah.
So they included some of those constellations too. But I think it's also important to recognize that they weren't just fixated on the zodiac in particular and the path of the sun or the moon. It was all of the stars. They all had their meanings.
Wow.
But
so did they emphasize the zodiacal band and the movers, the travelers, or did that understanding come more later?
The moon. This goes all the way back to the Sumerian period. The moon was the most prominent. He was seen as a celestial shepherd. They like to talk very poetically about the stars being just these beautiful divine cattle, and so
that's
Nana,
so cool.
was kind of, and wherever he went, he kind of just lit everything up and activated it.
Oh, that's so nice. Yeah. I too find the moon a lot more relevant than the sun, just in astrology generally, but I will leave that for another conversation. The way Sumerians used the sky and the way Babylonians then use the sky sound pretty different. Like the Babylonians were more oriented to the zodiacal band. Were they not very exclusively focused on the travelers? Or am I thinking of even later like astrology, like circa maybe the Greek?
It depends.
Yeah.
Yes, because generally speaking, yes, we could say that they were concerned about everything going on in the sky.
But what does that look like? Because that's my question. That's where it was going. So if they're not focused, like today we focus like breathless on the zodiacal band and okay. So what does that look like? That opens things up. That sounds like really holistic. And how close to the equator were they? How much of a vista to the southern skies did they even have? And so those two questions, and that's probably okay.
I don't know the exact long, but we're kind of looking at maybe not too far off from the Giza Plateau.
Doesn't seem so. Yeah.
Yeah.
So they can see some of the southern skies.
Yeah, absolutely.
Definitely see some of the southern
absolutely. Here's the thing. So one of the reasons I don't consider myself, well, there's a couple that I don't consider myself a Babylonian astrologer, although I do, implement some of the Babylonian meanings. I, look at the omens and that type of thing.
Okay.
But one of these reasons is because Babylonian astrology is exceptionally detailed. It's so complex. Anybody who truly does, there's a handful of people out there who really do Babylonian astrology. The rest of them are not doing it. Okay, they're doing something else. But Babylonian astrology and divination involved not just looking at the movements of the planets in the zodiac. They took into consideration bird flight colors in the sky,
Mhm,
the
mhm.
shadow moving across like the moon during eclipses, how
Hmm.
foggy it was, how dim the planets are. There was
Yeah, yeah.
divination
Such
in
a
Babylon.
sacred world. That's such a sacred world to live in,
Yes.
where everything is the language of the universe, like telling you, giving you omens and signs. That's powerful. Wow.
Yes, and they did not do this in isolation. So they were not looking at the planets in isolation. Now they were in the later periods when we can go and we can see what is essentially, natal prognosis from at least, 200 BC back to like 500 BC. They, despite what a lot of people still believe, they were doing natal astrology.
Mm-hmm.
But when you go farther back than that, it probably, I suspect, and again, I don't have proof, I have evidence, but I suspect it wasn't that complicated. I think that some of that hyper focus on the divinatory aspects, they had built up a level of a priestly class that was unheard of to the Sumerians. I mean, they had an entire culture based on, they just have temples full of priests, and their whole job is to predict the future and read through these old omens and the histories. So they were approaching it at a different level. So even to say that the Sumerians were doing something than the Babylonians different than the Greek, that's all true. I would say that, the other thing is that, and this goes to the Sumerians too, their concept of the sky, it was both, there was I'm trying to think of like the best example. The field, the constellation of the field, which was likely now what we would call like that square in Pegasus between the two fish of Pisces.
Yeah.
The field, even though it's right smack in the middle of these two fish of Pisces, was also sometimes referred to as the planet Mercury was called the field. Sometimes Aries was referred to as the field. Virgo was referred to as the field. And sometimes even stars outside of the ecliptic would have these names too. So when they write about this, and they codified this in the Babylonian period, but when they would talk about one of these stars, you had to be an astrologer to be able to decode this information and say, well, what are they actually talking about? Because a fish in Pisces it was almost the same thing as looking at the fish side of the goatfish of Capricorn. Anywhere that you had fish or water in the equation, you are now dealing with multiple layers of astrological meaning. So it wasn't just like 12 signs, here's our borders and boundaries, and that's it. They all overlapped, and it was just this tapestry of meaning. And part of your job as an astrologer was to decode some of that.
Right. So it wasn't a celestial science, which it became later. It was more of a craft, like involving some art and some metaphor, some mythological mastery, all the poetic things we mentioned earlier. So when I say craft, I think of craft as like an artistic endeavor, that a creative, and I think of I think that is very different than the way astrology made its way through history to us.
Absolutely.
It seems like the Greeks went in for that detail-oriented stuff and the codification of fine detail all around, kind of continuing that Babylonian trend. And they may have lost a lot of important mythology. I don't know, because I'm not.
Oh, they lost everything.
They lost everything.
Almost
That's
everything.
It's my sense of it. I'm not familiar with Sumerian mythology, and I know we don't have time to talk about Sumerian mythology today. But the Greek mythology is my least favorite thing about astrology. Is the archetypal framework of it is what's the word I'm looking for? It's lacking is not the word I'm looking for, but it is. It's lacking. It lacks.
It's representative of that culture at the time, which had definitely shifted.
That's it. That's it. It's totally patriarchal. The whole thing's male washed and whitewashed to a high degree, and it just doesn't give the full necessary, glimpse. So enough about that. It's for me, that's just on me to broaden my archetypal understandings. And that brings me to, wow, geez, we've been talking almost an hour. Your site's a place people can do that, learn about not just the stuff we've been talking about today, but some other stuff, like even Sumerian language. And you have a tremendous amount of resources on your website. It's actually one of the better websites I've seen in the whole astro bag. Like,
Thanks, Michael. I appreciate that.
Oh, you must have put a ton of work into it. I imagine you put a lot of thought and work into it. I want to encourage everyone to go. We'll put links up and everywhere. But
yeah, it's just SumerianAstrology.com. It's easy.
Yeah, simple and plain. But you have resources. Why don't you talk? I don't have your website up, and you talk about the resources on your website, because you have a lot of them. Like language, astrology. Is that the basic?
Yeah, so I have I'm reposting all of I have a full Sumerian language course. It's free.
Wow.
I had to, was it like in January? I had to redo my whole website. It's a whole thing. But I'm reposting all of the Sumerian language lessons into smaller chunks, because they were definitely, even for a beginner, I thought they were, probably a little bit too hard. So when you're learning, go ahead.
Thanks. Sorry. In like 10 or 15 words or less, why would someone be interested in learning Sumerian? Because
once you learn Sumerian, the history of humanity is at your fingertips, and you no longer have any gatekeepers getting in the way. And you can go in and learn. That's a different topic, but the Mesopotamian literary resources are phenomenal. They're still making discoveries. So you can go online and find texts where you can translate. Nobody's gone through them yet. At a certain point, a lot of these museums, they just took a picture, scanned it. They're like, pop it online. Maybe someone will figure it out. A few years back, somebody figured out that, I don't remember what period it was. I think it was the Babylonians. They were doing complex trigonometry, tracking Jupiter. And this was something that they thought was invented in Greece. As a matter of fact, a lot of things that they thought were a Greek invention turned out to be Babylonian.
Yeah.
So you do have to be kind of dorky.
That's a great answer.
But
that's amazing. Thank you. I find it relevant, but why I would want to learn the language? To understand directly and have access to something that the institutions of knowledge and learning today aren't trying to occlude or make opaque for us. Or maybe, but when you learn, I hear you. When you learn a language, it's yours, and it is a key. So what is like written in Sumerian? That's what the Sumerian language would be a key to. The culture and
not just the Sumerian language, but also the Akkadian, the Babylonian, all your astrological texts, your original astrological texts.
Right. Which is why the Mulapin looks like the Mulmul that's the same from culture to culture, Babylonian to Sumerian. That's the Mulmul is constellation, star group. Do I have that right?
Yeah, you can translate it star. It's the plural form of star or celestial body.
Okay, I guess in Babylon they use that to signify like constellation, or maybe
that's a determinative. They would put Mul in front of all of the constellations, like like whatever which one they were using
to symbolize that it was the stars they were talking about, because Mul meant star, and that goes back to Sumer, right?
Yeah,
so for thousands of years, right?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay, that's a powerful argument too for learning Sumerian. But so you teach astrology. You teach Sumerian astrology?
Well, technically, I teach ancient astrology, so it encompasses Sumerian and a lot of Babylonian. Not so much which way are the birds flying, and what color is the sunset?
My entrails went west.
Right.
There's a blood splatter that I don't understand.
Yeah. Right. So basically, I have a 15-hour video course. It's awesome. I also do one-on-one, but clearly, I mean, those calls sometimes they last 4 hours, depending on the individual, and they're not affordable for most people. They're definitely outside of the normal price range. So the other ones, what? I have it listed on my site for like $100 or something. It's cheap. I thought it was more important for people to get access to it than to try to make money off of it, right? Like I want people to have this information.
Yes.
But if I could make a clarification of what I do outside of like whatever pretty much everybody else does. I do not use the planetary rulership system created by the Greeks or the element modality system. There are none of those meanings. Those are absolutely a Greek invention. The like
so
when you were saying
detriment and all of the
because
the
it's
conditional.
Yes, it's all based on those systems that they created. Now, you said something earlier about basically classical astrology it's very different from the Babylonian side where, yes, there's this art form to it. It's clearly still wrapped up in their religion, their spirituality. But when the Greeks get it, it becomes very, very rigid, very sterilized. And I know we're not all big fans of, or at least you and I are clearly not big fans of the Greek mythology. The Greek mythology, in my view, is still better. It would be better if they actually use that than a lot of just relying so heavily on the element modality system, which again, that's rooted in their philosophies at the time. I mean, they were very, to their credit, they wanted to understand the universe. And, I appreciate like trying to systematize everything and dissect it, down to its
That was what Plato. That was what Plato and everything he touched came to represent. They wanted to find the perfect place for everything and systematize it. And I think that you and I live in a world that is more mythological and poetic and magical and doesn't need to be systematized. Thank you.
I agree.
But no, thank you. And I think that it's interesting because a lot of people get into the sort of constellational astrology thing, whether it's modern or ancient or something as hybrid amalgamation. But I think that one of the ways that the ancient world shows in people's practice today is that there is an appreciation and a respect for the deep metaphor in the mythologies. That there's like, I mean, William Beaudry wrote a book called The Little Book of Hercules, and it's about how the 10 or 12 labors of Hercules, I actually forget how many labors there were, maybe 10 or 12, but
something like that, yeah.
They're a metaphor for the Kundalini process of unfolding and awakening. He makes a absolutely compelling argument, and it's hard to look at mythology the same way again. Even Greek mythology, even stupid stuff like oh, Hercules, because on the surface it's not really awesome, but underneath it and contained in between the lines of the story and in the poetic language is and I think all mythology functions like this. I think the only reason these stories transmit through time for ages, thousands of years, not just generations or centuries, but like millennia, the reason is they have real power. And what is that power? In almost every case, it's connected to the stars, connected to some sort of sidereal map, or even in the case of the Hercules example I just gave, where it's connected to an inner journey. That there's, Hercules was at that time, I think, where was he in the heavens? Was he Orion? Did they give Orion to Hercules? I don't know, but he popped up somewhere.
Yeah, I don't
know. And it relates. That's the point. You can't get into any of this without it relating to the heavens, and it all starts to tie together in mythologically, elementally, thematically, all kinds of connected ways, which I think when people make just a pure science out of it, they miss. And I see a lot of people in the community of kind of constellational astrologers, and they still talk about like, oh, the moon is in detriment. And I'm like, that's nice. I've forgotten what that means even.
Yeah, isn't that nice to not know anymore?
My moon's in Capricorn, so I'm supposedly with this detrimental moon. And I just don't think I wouldn't want an astrologer to tell me my moon was in detriment. That would give me the sad feelings when I find a Capricorn moon to be, just
That's fantastic, Capricorn
yeah,
moon.
yeah, it's wonderful. Capricorn's
It's
the weirdest star group. So
yes,
that's
definitely.
cool. Yeah, the goatfish. But we don't have to explore any of that now. Well, in the interest of time, I want to start to wind it down.
Okay.
So I want to absolutely thank you for your perspective and your time, for being
Oh,
here
it's
today.
my pleasure.
So cool. Yeah, mine too. Anything you want to sort of wind everything up with, or close it on a note, like bring everything together, or share anything?
I'll defer to your judgment on that one. Is there
Cool.
anything else you want to?
No, I think I was thinking more of like to put all that. We talked about a lot and spanned a lot of history, even from like Younger Dryas event to the modern era. And I just think that the importance that for me that I think is really clear and worth illustrating is that this is deeper and older than the building blocks that they hand you. Even if they don't hand them to you, you have to seek them out. But when you find those astro building blocks and you start to build a puzzle and a picture that actually translates, and if you're looking at charts and you can make sense of that, and you do that, I just think that the importance for me is that there is such deeper, like you said, and you said it about Sumerian writing, not about astrology, but it goes directly to astrology, that every syllable had layers of meaning, and the holographic layers within a set of words or syllables could be interpreted like, literally, poetically. There could be secret meanings. It could be anything. And when we look at our astrology, I just think that the most powerful takeaway for me out of this conversation is like not to think that this started in Greece with Greek thinking, because we do it in a Greek way, that there is more to it. There's a deeper, richer undercurrent to all this. And there's a lot of minor takeaways, but that's my main one. Like, wow, this is relevant and helpful. It's not like a dead thing. It's not an old, irrelevant thing.
Yes, and when you think about it, classical or even into modern times, classical astrology, the Greek astrology that we inherited, has been practiced for about 2,000 years. But the Mesopotamian astrology was practiced for 4,000 years, at a minimum 4,000 years prior to that.
Wow.
And unfortunately, the mainstream astrology, and even a lot of Vedic astrology is actually just based on classical astrology.
Yeah.
They do fortunately use the sidereal zodiac, which is great. But to think that there's no wisdom beyond, prior to the Greek side is insane, because it was not just accurate, it was perfected over, all that time. And there's so much knowledge and wisdom that there is. I don't want to make it sound like there's no overlap. There is a little bit of overlap between Pisces is a good one. And I think that's partially because it's a very obvious archetype. We have these, watery creatures, and they're a little bit more on maybe the feminine side. More, associated with spirituality and knowledge, possibly death and rebirth. So that one's a lot of those things hold up even into the Sumerian period. So
Sumerian going backwards, a lot of the things that we hold from our sort of modern knowledge, if we go back, you're saying we'll find ideas that reflect to some extent.
They do exist.
Yeah.
Yes.
Thank you.
Where we don't see them is where the element modality system or the planetary rulership system just totally superimposed itself onto everything, created, the house meaning, everything.
Right.
I don't think most people realize how, and that in itself at this point is such a part of Western culture. I don't know that
it is. It's so. I mean, even in Greece, the goddess who symbolized the syncopated beat or chaos, which was Eris, she had no temples. They didn't build a temple to her. They didn't like any of it. They liked Plato's neat, orderly world where everything had its place and it fit and it was perfect. And when you found the place and put it there, you'd be happy. So, I mean, that was Plato's whole thing. And Eris came along and was like, "Meh." So, I don't think Eris. I don't know if Eris has a correlate in mythology and in older mythologies. I would think she did, but that's a conversation for a different day. I'm not a Neoplatonist or a Platonist. I actually I'm more of a I guess philosophically, I don't really ascribe to one like single philosophy. I don't think that seems healthy, but I do.
Yeah, I agree.
I do hail Eris, you know. I do respect the chaos and the natural, just sort of disorganization of the entropy of the universe. You can call it entropy. You can get away with that today, but yeah, people still don't like chaos. It's rough.
I have a question for you.
Please shoot.
Okay, so constellational astrology, we're looking at the boundaries, the borders of the different constellations. I get a lot of people, even when they're doing the course and stuff, they have first of all, they can get behind the constellation, but if they don't know the exact degree on either side, they get really upset. They're like, well, I need to know, like, is the sun in Leo? Is it in Cancer? Like, where is it at here?
Yeah. I find it's a cultural artifact.
Yeah, I would agree with that.
Yeah. So
I don't
we
think
can't
it's that
just,
important.
no, I don't. And then, you do have cusps, which much astrology has been like, cusps aren't real. And I will look sideways at you all day. Cusps, that happens. And it's just nothing that I ever emphasize to anyone I'm talking about astrology with, that like this fine arc minute degree of like, here's 0, and here's like, 30 odd degrees of the last constellation. I'd say that they're focused on the wrong thing. I mean, what they should be focused on, isn't the precise, A or B, but if it's that close that you're wondering, you should probably be thinking about what that would look like if these two sort of like archetypes were blended or worked together, or there was a transition from one, let's say, energetic passage or time wave into another, right? That's just my take on that, if you're asking.
It gets even more complicated when you consider that even into, I don't know, maybe, well, yeah, we'd say even into medieval times, the constellations were not necessarily where they are right now.
Oh, no. Yeah. Stars precess at different rates. Like, we know that now. They didn't know that then when they first noticed precession after how long of forgetting it. Yeah. So we're still putting it together. We're still putting the pieces together. Yeah. We have reason to think that the star Sirius precesses at a totally different rate than the rest of the stars in that's a dog star, this Canis Major. And we have no reason to think, given what we know in any model, and I'll include the electric universe model in this, we have no reason to think, for any reason that we know of, that the stars would precess in a uniform rate. The only reason stars would precess in a uniform rate is if the Earth was in the very epicenter of all of the universe, which rotated specifically around it. Highly unlikely.
Right.
So with that in mind, I think it just all falls apart. I think some of the assumptions we take for granted, it's just you have to let them fall apart, and be a little more flexible about things. Rigid ideas only go so far. Yeah.
Yep.
Well, this feels to me like a good place to kind of wind it down. Is there anything that you're up to that you want to promote? Is there anything you'd like to make people aware of that
I mean, we live stream now every Wednesday at 11 a.m. Eastern. Me, Friar Pezzle, Nikki from Revolution Astrology. And we mostly just talk about, well, you were on there, Michael, you know.
I was.
We
Yeah,
talk
yeah, it
about
was a cool.
not just astrology, the mysteries of the universe. You know, we like to veer off in all different kinds of directions. So anybody
So
out
get
there,
subscribed to Sumerian Astrology on YouTube for that, right? And
Yeah,
then
yeah.
click the little bell with do the notifications to get the updates. That's what's going on. Cool. Cool,
Yeah.
cool. So your live streams, that's kind of your main kind of outreach, your interaction with the people right now.
Yeah, I have no other social media, which is wonderful. It's
Wow.
such a magical life without all of the social media.
I don't want my Facebook friends to see me make. I don't want them to see me do that and think that that I don't love them. But social media.
You know what? It's hard.
If you know, you know. So yeah.
If you it is an amazing tool. I use YouTube every day. That's how I get my news. That's how so for me to use YouTube as like a way to connect with other people, obviously that's like a go-to place. If you're on Facebook, you're on Instagram, and it serves you, then like go for it, and it's great.
Okay,
it just wasn't for me, you know.
Sing it. That's my song too. I do Facebook because well, it's more keyed to nuanced conversation than Instagram, and I like this. There's a group of people or two or three that I can think of right off the top of my head that I'll keep that Facebook thing. But
yeah,
all that aside, I want to thank you.
Oh, thank you, Michael, for real.
For your work. Yeah. Oh, you're welcome. You're welcome, for real. I think this is important in more ways than we've even started to mention today. And just it's been a delight. It's been a real honor.
Yeah, likewise. Thank you.
Cool. You're welcome.